great. Now I've stepped into a Ray Harryhausen movie. Or maybe it's more like Roger Corman.
Welcome webheads, my name is Hack of the hacjacshow and I would like to welcome you to Spider-Blood, a retrospective video series looking back at Spider-Man the animated series. I want to apologize for the long delay, so keep this intro short. If you're into comic books, video games, metal music, and anime, then check out the hacjacshow channel on YouTube and BitChute. If you enjoyed this video, please share it all over social media, and without further ado, let us begin the episode. For today's episode, we'll be looking at another villain's first appearance. This time, it is the Master of Illusion himself, Mysterio. In this video, I'll be covering his first episode and comic appearance and decide whether or not Mysterio's introduction stands up to scrutiny 27 years later. Let us begin with Season 1, Episode 5, The Menace of Mysterio. Our story begins with a heist. New York City's Metropolitan Museum has been burglarized and the perpetrator, Spider-Man. Upon hearing this news, Peter Parker sets to figure out who is the imposter and to clear his good name and reputation. At the same time, a new costume foe arrives at the scene, dubbing himself Mysterio.
Be afraid. I'm here to help. I am Mysterio, and I am putting Spider-Man on notice. There's no place you'll be able to hide, and nowhere you can run.
For his debut appearance, he puts a challenge to a webhead by announcing he will stop Spider-Man from terrorizing the city of New York. Peter has a full plate of problems now. Not only must he prove himself innocent in the eyes of the public, but deal with a new menace who has more than a few tricks up his sleeve.
Just follow the yellow brick road.
I'm beginning to feel like a certain coyote.
To start things off, if you recall my last video, which I recommend watching through the banner on top of the screen, I made a complaint about the lack of Mary Jane in the Dr. Octopus episode. Well, fortunately, she has returned. Though as a downside, she is not part of the main plot and is simply there to add inconsequential drama.
Sure know how to make a girl feel important.
She is a weaker aspect of the episode, but at least we get a small progression to Peter and MJ's eventual relationship. We are also introduced into the show's first original character, Lieutenant Lee. Lee is an honest lieutenant of the NYPD and has made a personal mission to discover Spider-Man's true identity and motivation. She's a good addition to the show's cast of characters, serving as the hero's lone supporter in the midst of naysayers and skeptics. Lee is level-headed, professional, and has good intuition on a person's character. One last first this episode also showcases is the origins of Spider-Man. It's here where viewers witness the tragedy of Spider-Man's beginnings, albeit in a very abridged form. Though to be honest, the usage of the origin story was not done well for this episode. Usually an origin story will be the center of an episode's plot, however, Spidey's origins only serve to resolve a conflict in which Peter gives up being Spider-Man. Now, that in of itself is not bad. What makes it bad is that Peter's decision to give up being Spider-Man lasted only 2 minutes of screen time.
It's been a mess since the day I put you on. Why'd I ever do it anyway? I can't even keep a date because of you. I had the power and I didn't use it. I lost my uncle because I ignored my responsibilities. He always used to tell me, with great power comes great responsibility. If I stop being Spider-Man, who else will suffer?
Peter underwent a full character arc within one scene. Other shows will make this life-changing decision the main conflict of the story, but due to the animated series' quick pacing and condensed plots, it gets resolved in one conversation and a flashback to convince Peter to not give up being Spider-Man. This is my biggest criticism of the episode. It wastes what could have been a real dramatic moment for Peter and would have had a real impact on the series, and instead it uses the most important aspect of Peter's history for a Villain of the Week episode. Mysterio is a memorable, unique villain in Spidey's Rogues Gallery, but not one that's appropriate for the story presented here. In fact, the episode will be much more enjoyable without having a last-minute conflict that was resolved as soon as it began. Lastly, it wouldn't be a Spider-Blood episode without highlighting a few animation errors. The Menace of Mysterio is inspired by Mysterio's first comic appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 13 under the same title. The episode adaptation follows the main plot of the original comic story, with, of course, changes and additions thrown in. Perhaps the biggest change from the original story would have to be the absence of the psychiatrist subplot in the comic. And one of the most bizarre storytelling ideas I've read in comics, Peter assumes, after seeing news reports of Spider-Man committing crimes, that he is having a split personality disorder. It was even advertised on the cover.
What's this? Spider-Man turning to crime? You're in for a real shock. Ever see a comic mag superhero take his troubles to a psychiatrist? You will now.
To give the comic story credit, even though the shock value of a superhero needing therapy was pretty brazen, really ended up being a moment that lasted a few panels, it provided a real internal conflict within Peter. Not only was he being impersonated for malicious reasons, Peter was also worried about his and Aunt May's living situation. If he couldn't make enough money to pay the mortgage, him and Aunt May would be homeless. Combine that with no big stories for him to photograph for the Daily Bugle, school, and being in a relationship with Betty Brant, no wonder Peter thought he was going crazy with all the responsibilities on his shoulders. Keep in mind that this comic was made during the Lee Ditko era of Spider-Man, so it's very surprising for me to see Peter be dealing with mental problems this early on in the character's history. Aside from the psychiatrist plot, the other major difference in the story is Mysterio's motivation. In the episode, Mysterio wants revenge on Spider-Man since he was the one who put him in jail. What had happened was that Mysterio, or using his real identity, Quentin Beck, was illegally using a mortar for special effects in the film he was working on. When the mortar exploded, it unfortunately damaged a helicopter, causing it to crash. If not for Spider-Man's rescue, Beck would have accidentally killed the pilot. He's lucky that if not for Spider-Man, Beck would have been charged with involuntary manslaughter instead of felony endangerment. Though I doubt Beck sees it that way, as he's clearly in a calm state of mind.
It's payback time.
Payback? For what? You did it all to yourself!
Yes, that's what my psychiatrist said. But you know what? His sessions never made me feel this good.
Comic book Mysterio had a simpler motivation. Mysterio planned to imitate Spider-Man in order to fulfill his crimes, and have Spidey take the blame for it. He became more ambitious as he decided to create the Mysterio persona in order to take down Spider-Man. Thus, he will gain the public's favor as a hero while secretly being the villain. As for everything else, the episode follows along the major set pieces of the comic pretty accurately. Both stories begin with a heist, Mysterio and Spider-Man have their first battle on top of the Brooklyn Bridge, and both end with our hero and villain facing off in a movie studio. Obviously, the details, characters, and action scenes play out differently between the two mediums, but ultimately serve the same purpose. In the comic, Mysterio robs money from businessmen. In the show, he robs a museum. Cartoon Peter immediately suspects an imposter, while comic book Peter does not. Mysterio makes his grand announcement on capturing Spider-Man to Jameson in both versions. In the show, it's at the museum, and the comic is at the Daily Bugle. I can go on, but I believe my point has been made. Overall, this episode is the most accurate adaptation of the original Spider-Man comics thus far. It helps that it was co-written by Marv Wolfman, who, among other famous comic titles, had his own run on The Amazing Spider-Man. No doubt his role had a major influence in how the episode came to be. It also helps that the original comic is also a well-made story of Peter dealing with the stress of his day-to-day life, with fun action sequences that show how formidable Mysterio was in his first appearance. I highly recommend reading the comic, whether through a trade or the issue itself. In conclusion, while there are flaws in how the story played out, specifically when it came to Peter's internal conflict being Spider-Man, this was a very entertaining episode to watch. Mysterio was presented as a very dangerous foe for Spider-Man, and thus it was satisfying to see him being defeated by the end. There is a good amount of banter between both our hero and villain, and, to give credit, you have a Villain of the Week story that tried to do a little more than what was needed. It's disappointing though that the origin story felt like it was put in at the last minute, and for Mary Jane's second appearance, she had no importance to the story itself, though it's certainly better than Dr. Octopus' debut episode and a lot less contrived. Thank you very much for watching my 5th Spider-Blood video. Hope you found it entertaining and hopefully you learned something. The only thing I ask is to share the video amongst other Spider-Man fans so that others can enjoy it as you did. Episode 6 will be coming soon, and I guarantee you won't have to wait half a year for it. This is Hack of the Hat Jack Show, signing off.